Obviously, we should just acknowledge the awkwardness of the camera.
Yeah.
But so we're just gonna quickly zoom through our typical check-in, and then the goal of today's planning session is going to be to first, there's kind of like two parts we wanted to get accomplished. One was to review some key points that you created for Monday next week, and then apply what we learned from reviewing your key points to Tuesday, so that you can then do Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and turn it in. And then after that, to just kind of like look at your materials for Monday and Tuesday as much as we have time for, and kind of look at like clarity and heavy lifting and things that you've been working on.
Cool.
Sound good?
Yep.
Awesome. Well, happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
Cool. Let's. What's your work cloud?
An 8.
That's pretty good. Why so high?
Because we're getting into the road, and drafting started yesterday, and it's looking pretty good so far across the board for all my classes.
Yeah, it really is looking good.
Yeah, so I'm feeling good about that.
It was so awesome to be in there the other day.
Yeah.
Yesterday, I was like really feeling it. So awesome. And we'll come back to that because I think that'll talk about like what have you done to like get to there. So because I think we can leverage that for next unit. Personal cloud.
An 8.
Sounds pretty good. What's going on there?
I think I'm just getting more efficient at getting stuff done at work and not spending all weekend doing everything. And also my birthday's on Monday, so I can't complain about that.
Awesome. Birthday on Monday. Any big plans?
No. But just a day.
Just a day. A work day.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. So I think you kind of already came to this, but like what successes have you had in the last week? I think we kind of already broached this, but
so I think one thing is moving more of the heavy lifting to kids. But I also think this PBA, I've become more clear for the expectations of what I want in the PBA.
Awesome. Cool. So moving heavy liftings and clarifying expectations. Awesome. Can you give me an example of a way that you've moved the heavy lifting to kids? Be more a little specific.
So a lot of the key points in CFS they've sort of seen before, the things that they need to do. So they kind of go up. I review the key points, but then they grade PBAs or they do activities where they rank. Like for example, on Wednesday we did context and they were ranking the best context. And a student goes up and leads that debate. So I sit in the back and watch them, basically.
Awesome. Great. What do you attribute this shift in like these two key areas that we've been working on, like heavy lifting and clarifying expectations? Like what specifically on your end have you done to get to there?
I think, I don't know about the heavy lifting as much. Clarifying expectations, I've taken a lot of time to look at my own essay and think about what I did and how I can push kids there. And I've also looked at the Catcher in the Rye essays and seen where they've fallen short and why, so I can think about how we can fix it on the front end.
So kind of both like looking at the test drive,
yeah,
and then looking at like last.
Yeah.
And you're talking about the exemplar, not the model. So the one that you wrote for.
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Yeah, which we talked about during your unit plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. That was a good one too. So I think, awesome, great. Cool. Well, great. Seems like you're hitting a good stride, and I've really seen that. Let's just kind of like talk about updates. Kind of like last week we talked about big goals, moving heavy lifting, talking about ELD strategies, but we're definitely going to shift that to, I think, not after break, that week after next. We'll kind of dive into that so that we can do some of that implementation after break. Today we talked about really digging into PARC, the narrative task, with a focus on key points and clarifying expectations and materials.
Yeah.
Perfect. Awesome. So let's start with key points. So let's see what you brought.
Okay, so for Monday, these are the key points here. So I wanted to define what the narrative task is for them. Sorry, I can't read upside down.
What's your aim? Let's start with that first.
Yeah. So we will be able to identify the process for writing a narrative. So it's really like a heavy modeling day for me. to show them how I would write a narrative and respond to a prompt. So we're going to work through it together.
And then ultimately identifying the process, like what you would do.
Right.
Day.
So I already have like a process laid out. So more practicing that process.
Okay.
And I'm showing them
full
the
model.
Process. Yep,
awesome.
Full
Because
model.
like this task is like completely new to them.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So let's, before we jump into your key points, just kind of go back to the CFS that we talked about for key points on our end.
Yeah.
So, and then basically what I'll ask you to do is we'll go over the CFS real quick.
Okay.
And then I'll ask you to go through and walk through whether you think this meets it.
Okay.
And then kind of like we'll tweak as needed, and then I'll have you create a CFS for Tuesday based on the same process. CFS for the CFS.
CFS.
So we said basically a CFS, one thing that it does is identifies / defines knowledge and key terms needed to accomplish the aim, right? So that's the first thing we said key points need to do. And then the second thing they do is they outline a process / with like steps or questions depending on like the aim,
right?
So they outline like once you've given them the definitions or key knowledge they need, then you outline some sort of process or like step-by-step thing, which I guess is a process, or questions they're going to ask themselves depending on the aim,
right?
To accomplish the goal, the day's aim, accomplish the aim. So if we say, so then we'll go back to the aim. Your aim is that students will identify a process for writing a narrative. Can you now walk me through how your 3 key points either meet or don't meet these 2 criteria for success? So first is, does your key point, do your key points identify / define the knowledge kids would need to accomplish the same? So to identify a process for writing a narrative.
So I think, if I could include the process in here, because that's like the whole big part.
Yeah,
okay,
totally.
Cool.
That's right.
So I feel like these 2 try to define what a narrative is and what they're expected to do.
Narrative.
So.
Okay.
And then I said the narrative task requires literary analysis, but it also tests your creativity in using the literary analysis to continue the story.
Okay. And then lastly.
The narrative task isn't asking. Oh gosh, that's bad grammar. Isn't asking you to summarize. Instead, it is asking you to write a story. You need to show, don't tell.
Okay. Yeah, I think so. So the question is, tell me, just kind of like separate, and then we'll litmus test it, right? What would kids need to know in order to do this? So the first one is pretty, like what information do they need to know?
They need to know what a narrative is.
So perfect.
Yep.
Right, what the narrative task is, what the narrative. So are we yes to that?
Kind of. I think the write a story based on that text might answer that.
So like, do we want to tweak that? Well, so let's say like kind of.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll edit this a little bit to say, so kind of. What else would they need to know? Like, so what it is.
Well, I think they need to know what they're expected to do.
Like, what do they need to do?
Yeah.
I don't even say they, I'd say what does the narrative product do?
Right.
Yeah, or like purpose?
Yeah, the purpose.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think yeah. What is the purpose of this writing?
Yeah.
I think and then that I think will be very clear to kids too.
Yeah.
But I think you kind of do in key point 2, but like I think if we tweak it and use the word purpose, I think it'll make more sense to them.
Cool.
And then anything else?
I think 3 starts to get into this process idea of you're not summarizing. You're writing a story.
So they need to know how to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
How to. Let's be more specific. So not just how to do it, but how to what? Like what would loosely what are the things they would need to know? Think about like writing.
Right.
So they need to know.
Well, I think I'm trying to think. Sorry.
How do they? Well, I think I'm not being really clear. I think it's like how do they do this first and then do that when they're going to do it? What's the first thing they're going to do?
So the first thing they're doing is reading and looking for literary devices.
So how do they read the text? How after they've read it, how do they before they write, they should create a
graphic organizer.
Yeah. How do they?
How do they plan?
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
How do? I
I feel like it's like Mad Libs.
No, and I also feel like you think I'm looking for something crazy. Like,
no,
yeah,
okay,
like what you've already like. How do they plan? Because we just want to test this against like what you're telling me they need to know. So how do they read the text? How do they plan? And then obviously how do they like what do they need to include in their draft or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah.
No, well I guess that's up here. So then how to write maybe.
Yeah, how to write.
Like is that going to be in there? Yeah, we'll see. Okay, so now I'm gonna ask you, what is it? Kind of. How do they read? Or sorry, what is the purpose? Can you read the key point number 2?
The narrative task requires literary analysis, but it also tests your creativity in using the literary analysis to continue the story.
So I think that's close, but we might want to like rewrite that one to say like the purpose of the narrative task is to do this with that included.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then the third one is how do they do it, right? Like, and I think you start here.
And then my process.
It goes into their process.
It's supposed to help with the planning part, at least.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Right? And I think, like, these are all key points. So, like, key point 3 kind of goes with this, right?
Yeah.
So I would, like, get rid of this, and we can tweak this to say, like, when writing the narrative task, like, you need to show, don't tell by using the following process. Boom, 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 boom. All right, so let's go through. Do you need a piece of paper? Or do you want to just write it on there?
I'll just write it down.
Okay, so let's tweak key point 1 first.
Okay.
You said, so the goal of that one is to just define what is the narrative task.
Yeah.
So you tell me what's the narrative task.
So the narrative task is you read a story and then you need to answer a prompt in relation to that story. I'm trying to think of a good way to define it.
How about what's the difference between the narrative task and all the other tasks? Because I think that's the biggest one.
Yeah.
Because I think
you're not analyzing the text that you're reading. Well, you are, but that's not like what the prompt is asking you to do. The prompt is asking you to use this text.
In order to write what?
A narrative.
Right.
Or continue a story.
Yeah, like a piece of fiction, right?
Yeah.
So I think you've just got it. I think the narrative task. Yeah, go ahead and finish what we.
So the narrative task
requires students to, first you said.
Read a text. And then use the text to write a story.
Yeah, and use that text to inform their own. And I think like narrative is great, but I think kids need to hear the word fiction too.
Okay.
Because I worry because narrative applies to both fiction and nonfiction.
Right. So
if
write
we
a piece
only
of fiction.
yeah, like I think a narrative fiction, right? Because if we only say, because there's non-narrative fiction too, right?
Yeah.
Flash fiction, like if we only say, and push me if you disagree. If we only say narrative, I worry, like, will that click in all kids that this is, like, a creative task, that they're writing fiction?
No, and I think
narrative is important. Like, they need to know that, yes, it's all going to be about story writing, story elements, all that stuff, but also, like, that this is a piece of fiction, it's a piece of creative work.
Yeah.
Which is so crazy. But
yeah.
Awesome. So I think you got it, and you had most of it in anyway, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Moving to number 2. So I think, like, you have everything there.